Jennifer was a young woman burdened by loneliness and the weight of depression. Her world, often dark and devoid of joy, found brief relief in the pages of books, an escape from oppressive reality. Libraries were her sanctuary, each one housing infinite universes, offering her the chance to live 1,000 different lives. The shelves brimming with stories were a constant invitation, and she gratefully accepted, allowing herself to be transported to distant realms, past eras and uncertain futures. In the quiet aisles of large and small libraries, Jennifer wandered like a shadow, always in search of the next literary adventure. It was in books that she found companionship, heroes and villains who became her loyal friends, wrapped in plots that made her heart race with excitement. There, lost among words, she could be anyone she wanted, a brave warrior, wise sorceress, or a daring explorer. One afternoon, while visiting an old library she rarely frequented, Jennifer felt a strange sense of anticipation. The air seemed heavier, laden with stories waiting to be discovered. The dark wooden furniture and the smell of aged paper gave the place an almost magical atmosphere, as if every corner hid ancient secret. As her fingers glided over the spines of the books, a particular volume caught her attention. It didn't seem to belong there, standing out with a worn, untitled cover. Curious, Jennifer picked it up and felt a chill run down her spine. Cover's texture was strange, almost organic, and a name seemed to be burned into the inside cover. A name she didn't recognize but felt unsettlingly familiar. When she opened the book, the afternoon light filtering through the high windows seemed to dim momentarily, as if the printed words were absorbing the surrounding brightness. The yellowed pages exuded a scent that mixed mold and something indefinable, something that made her heart race. And so, Jennifer got lost in the words once more, unaware that this journey would be different from all the others, marked by a fate no previous book ever hinted at. As Jennifer delved into the pages of that mysterious book, each word seemed to pulse with its own energy, as if the stories within it were alive. The ink, in some places, appeared fresh, almost wet, as if it had been recently written. The letters danced before her eyes, forming vivid images in her mind, more real than anything she had ever experienced before. She turned the page, feeling a strange mix of excitement and fear. The intricate and disturbing illustrations in the margins seemed to watch her back. There was something profoundly wrong with that book, but Jennifer's curiosity was insatiable, and she couldn't stop reading. Each story within that book was darker than the last. Narratives of despair, loss, and madness. She felt as if she were being drawn into a parallel world, where the boundaries between reality and imagination were dangerously thin. And then, on a particularly yellowed and worn page, she found something that made her stop. It was a story about a young woman very much like herself, described with frighteningly precise details. The narrative spoke of a lonely girl, book lover who found a strange volume in an old library. As she read, Jennifer felt a growing cold in her stomach. Coincidences were too disturbing to ignore. Every detail, every emotion described in the story seemed to mirror her own thoughts and feelings. Feeling of being watched intensified. Jennifer looked around the library, but she was alone. The sunlight was fading, plunging the room into deeper shadows. She tried to close the book. Her fingers wouldn't obey, as if they were glued to the pages. Suddenly, a sentence leapt out at her. Upon finishing this story, she knew her fate was sealed. A scream of terror echoed in her mind. Trying to break free from that spell of words, Jennifer stood up suddenly, knocking over the chair and some books. The sound echoed through the silent library, but she heard no one coming to see what had happened. She needed to leave, to get away from that place and that book. But when she tried to let go of the volume, she felt a strange resistance, as if it were stuck to her hands. Desperate, Jennifer ran through the aisles, her heart pounding, her eyes wide with fear. The shadows seemed to stretch, trying to grab her, pull her back. When she finally reached the library door, she looked back one last time. The shadows were still, but the feeling of being watched did not leave her. With one last effort, she managed to drop the book, which fell to the floor with a dull thud. The air around her felt lighter, but the sense of imminent danger still lingered. Jennifer ran out, vowing never to return, but not realizing that the true terror was just beginning. Even after leaving the library, Jennifer couldn't shake the thought of the mysterious book. The images and dark words continued to dance in her mind, invading her dreams and deepest thoughts. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the distorted figures and heard the unsettling whispers that seemed to come from the pages. It was as if the book were calling to her, an irresistible invitation she couldn't ignore. Days passed, and the unease within her grew. She tried to distract herself with other books, other stories, but nothing held her attention the same way. The pull of the unknown, the enigma of that strange volume, was stronger than anything she had ever felt. It was an almost tangible force, drawing her back to the library. Finally, unable to resist, Jennifer decided to return. She needed to understand what it was about that book that disturbed her so much, needed to uncover the mysteries it held. Entering the old library, she felt a chill run down her spine. The place was quieter than before, as if the very walls were waiting for her arrival. She walked quickly through the aisles, her steps echoing on the wooden floor. The book was exactly where she had left it, lying on the floor, seemingly untouched. Picking it up, she felt a strange familiarity, as if she were reuniting with an old friend or an ancient enemy. This time, as she opened the book, the words seemed clearer, sharper. They called to her, begging to be read. With each page turned, the feeling of being watched returned, but now it was accompanied by an insatiable curiosity. Jennifer wanted more, needed to know more. The stories seemed to speak directly to her, revealing dark secrets and ancient curses. With each line, she felt a deep and disturbing connection, as if the book were alive, responding to her emotions and thoughts. The figures in the margins of the pages seemed to move, changing position each time she looked at them. And then, in the middle of a particularly dark story, she found something that made her stop again. A passage that described an old library, an untitled book, a young woman who couldn't resist it all. The coincidences were now impossible to ignore. It was as if the book were writing her life story, or perhaps she was living the book's story. With a mix of fear and fascination, Jennifer realized she was becoming part of that dark narrative. Every decision she made seemed guided by the printed words. Every step she took led her deeper into a world of shadows and secret. The pull of the unknown, the book that belonged nowhere, was consuming her mind and soul. She didn't know how, but she felt that her fate was irrevocably tied to that book. And as she continued to read, part of her wondered if she would ever escape its dark embrace, or if she was destined to be lost forever in the pages of a story that had no end. From the moment Jennifer fully surrendered to the book's words, her reality began to disintegrate in strange and disturbing ways. It was as if the stories she read came to life, projecting themselves from the paper into the world around her. As she delved deeper into the pages, the world inside the book seemed to merge with the world outside it. At first, it was small details. The sound of footsteps when she was alone at home, shadows moving in the corner of her vision, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Jennifer tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, the result of sleepless nights and her growing obsession with the book. But soon, the events became impossible to ignore. One night, while reading about a character being pursued by a shadowy figure, Jennifer heard a noise behind her. She turned quickly, her heart racing. There was nothing. She returned to the book, but the feeling of being watched persisted, stronger than ever. With each page turned, the sounds and shadows around her intensified. It was as if the stories were unfolding in real life, each detail manifesting around her with terrifying clarity. One early morning, while reading a particularly distressing passage about a woman who saw faces in the walls, Jennifer felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She looked at the wall beside her and, to her horror, saw faces emerging from the peeling paint, their expressions contorted in agony. She screamed, dropping the book and stepping back. The faces remained, their empty eyes following her every move. Desperate to understand what was happening, Jennifer began to flip through the book again, looking for answers. The stories seemed increasingly personal, reflecting her own fears and anxieties. And then she realized she wasn't just reading about these horrors. She was living them. Each page turned, each new story brought a new manifestation of terror. One afternoon, while reading about a character who discovered hidden messages in the pages, Jennifer found a series of tiny annotations in the margins of the book. They were encrypted messages, filled with warnings and laments from previous readers. "The book is alive," said one. "It sees us," warned another. Trembling, Jennifer realized she was not alone in her obsession. Many before her had fallen into the book's trap, and none had escaped. The boundaries between fiction and reality, completely undone. Jennifer began to see shadowy figures lurking in the corners of her vision, hear voices whispering terrible secrets in her ears. The stories she read ceased to be mere words on paper and became palpable nightmares, haunting her day and night. She knew she needed to stop, to abandon the book and try to reclaim her life. The pull was too strong. The mystery, the terror, everything ensnared her, entangling her mind in a labyrinth from which she could not escape. And so, even knowing the risks, Jennifer continued to read, sinking deeper into the stories that came to life, knowing that each page turned brought her one step closer to a dark and irrevocable fate. Jennifer's nights became increasingly tormented, an endless sequence of nightmares and visions that blurred the line between sleep and wakefulness. Every time she closed her eyes, she found herself transported to the settings described in the book. Dark and inhospitable places where creatures whispered ancient secrets and shadows seemed to have a will of their own. One night, when she opened the book once again, she found a new story that hadn't been there before. It was as if the volume was growing, feeding on her obsession. This new narrative was different from the others. It was an invitation. It described a portal, a path to another world, hidden somewhere in the library where she had found the book. Curiosity and terror competed within her. The pull of the unknown was irresistible. The book seemed to speak directly to her, the words pulsing with a sinister energy. "Come," they said, "discover the secrets that lie beyond the pages." Jennifer felt a chill, but something inside her, perhaps the part that still longed for adventure, for an escape from the monotony of her life, pushed her to accept the invitation. The next morning, she returned to the old library. The atmosphere was heavier than ever, as if the very building was aware of her presence and the dark purpose that brought her back. She followed the book's instructions, each step echoing with a supernatural weight through the silent aisles. Each shadow seemed to lengthen, each sound amplified, until she found a door she had never noticed before. The door was small and discreet, hidden among dusty shelves. Trembling, Jennifer turned the handle. The door opened with a mournful creak, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. The air rising from the depths was cold and damp, filled with the smell of earth and something else, something putrid and ancient. With her heart racing, she descended. Each step seemed to whisper ancient secrets, promises, and warnings mixed in a cacophony of voices. When she reached the bottom, she found a chamber illuminated only by a faint light emanating from an unknown source. In the center of the chamber, on a stone pedestal, was a book. It wasn't the same volume she had found in the library above, but something even older, more macabre. The walls around were covered with inscriptions in a language Jennifer did not recognize, but that seemed to vibrate with its own energy. As she approached, she felt an almost physical pull, as if the book on the pedestal was calling to her. When she reached out to touch it, an intense cold shot through her arm. The shadows around seemed to move, dancing at the edges of her vision. And then, a low, guttural voice whispered her name. Jennifer stepped back. Something prevented her from fleeing. Curiosity and fear were intertwined, and she knew she had crossed a point of no return. The book on the pedestal was not just an object. It was an entity, a portal to an abyss of unimaginable secrets and horrors, and she was about to cross it. When Jennifer touched the book on the pedestal, a wave of cold swept through her body, freezing her bones and stealing her breath. She tried to pull away, but her fingers seemed glued to the cover. As she opened the volume, the pages felt almost alive, pulsing under her touch. The words that had once been mere ink on paper now seemed to whisper in her mind, each line a dark murmur of forgotten secret. With each page turned, the world around her began to change. The stone chamber walls seemed to move, distorting into impossible shapes. The shadows lengthened, transforming into grotesque figures that danced to the rhythm of the whispers. It was as if reality itself was disintegrating, shaped by the malevolent force of the book. Jennifer felt panic rising within her, but also a strange fascination. The stories on the pages now seemed to recount her own life, each detail frighteningly precise. She saw visions of herself wandering through the deserted streets of a ghost town, pursued by hooded figures. She saw herself trapped in a maze of mirrors, each reflection a distorted and evil version of herself. With each vision, Jennifer felt her sanity slipping away, the line between real and imaginary becoming increasingly thin. The faces that appeared on the chamber walls seemed to call to her, begging for help, but also mocking her despair. She tried to scream, but her voice was absorbed by the shadows, transformed into a weak and distant echo. Back at home, things were no better. The distortion of reality followed her. Objects moved on their own, shadows danced on the walls even without a light source. The book's words echoed in her mind, preventing her from thinking clearly. Every noise, every movement around her seemed charged with an invisible threat. One night, while desperately trying to sleep, Jennifer felt a presence in the room. She opened her eyes and saw dark figures at the foot of the bed, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. They didn't move, just watched her, breathing in unison with her racing heartbeat. When she finally mustered the courage to turn on the light, figures disappeared. A feeling of being watched remained. Returning to the library in an attempt to undo what had begun, Jennifer found the place transform. The shelves were now covered in cobwebs, the books falling apart, and the air was filled with the smell of decay. The doors she once knew were locked or gone, turning the building into a maze with no exit. Desperate, Jennifer began tearing the book's pages, hoping to end the nightmare. But each destroyed page seemed only to intensify the distortion around her. The words rebuilt themselves. The stories rewrote themselves before her eyes. The shadowy figures became more tangible, whispering promises and curses in her ears. Jennifer was trapped in an endless cycle of horror, where each attempt to escape led her deeper into the abyss. Reality had become a living nightmare, a distorted reflection of the stories she had read. And now she understood that she was not just a reader, but also a character, forever enmeshed in the pages of a book that should never have been opened. Jennifer's obsession with the book led her on a desperate quest for answers. Who had written such a work? What was the origin of that macabre volume that distorted reality and devoured her sanity? The cryptic annotations in the margins provided clues, mentioning a mysterious author seemingly connected to forces beyond human comprehension. Determined to uncover the truth, Jennifer decided to follow these clues, hoping to find a way to reverse the terror that enveloped her. In one of the annotations, she found the name of a forgotten scholar, a man named Elias Blackwood, who had disappeared decades ago. The few references she found about him spoke of a student of dark arts, an alchemist seeking forbidden knowledge and eternal life at all costs. Everything pointed to one place, an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of the city, where Blackwood had conducted his final experiments before vanishing without a trace. With a pounding heart, Jennifer made her pilgrimage to the mansion. The house was in ruins, its windows broken and walls covered in vegetation. The entrance creaked, as if warning her not to proceed, but she was determined. Upon entering, she was greeted by an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water and the occasional rustle of rats. Following the book's annotations, Jennifer found a hidden study behind a false bookshelf. The room was filled with ancient manuscripts, diagrams of rituals, and flasks of unknown liquids. In the center, a heavy wooden table held a dust-covered journal. Opening the journal, she saw Blackwood's handwriting, his notes detailing his descent into madness as he explored the cursed book's secrets. Then, she saw him. A hooded figure emerged from the shadows, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Jennifer felt a deadly chill as she recognized the figure from her haunting dreams. It was Elias Blackwood, or what remained of him, now a specter trapped between worlds, the guardian of the forbidden knowledge he had so desperately sought. "You sought me out." Blackwood's voice was a cold whisper, "and now you are ensnared in the same web that trapped me." He extended a spectral hand, and Jennifer felt an irresistible pull on her very soul. "The book is a door," he continued, "passage to realms where human sanity cannot survive." Jennifer tried to step back, but the shadows around her seemed to come alive, gripping her limbs. Blackwood began to reveal the book's secrets, secrets that had destroyed his mind and imprisoned him in an eternal state of torment. Each word was a stab at Jennifer's fragile hope, each revelation a step closer to the abyss. "There is no escape," he finally said, his eyes glowing with ancient madness. "The book chooses its readers, and once chosen, you belong to it. Your fate is sealed, just like mine." He stepped closer, and Jennifer felt his icy presence penetrate her skin, touching her soul. "Now you must decide," he whispered. "Accept your fate, or resist and be utterly lost." Jennifer knew she was facing an impossible choice. She could feel the dark forces trying to pull her into the book, into the same eternal nightmare that had consumed Blackwood. Trembling, she closed her eyes, trying to find a fragment of courage within herself, knowing that any decision she made would lead her deeper into an endless horror. Jennifer felt the weight of destiny hanging over her, like a blade about to fall. Elias Blackwood's words echoed in her mind, each syllable imbued with despair and madness. She knew she couldn't escape the book, but the idea of surrendering to the same dark fate as Blackwood terrified her. Determined to fight, even if it was her last battle, Jennifer grabbed Blackwood's journal, hoping to find a solution, ritual, anything that could save her. Frantically flipping through the pages of the journal, she found a passage describing a banishment ritual, something Blackwood had tried but failed. Maybe, Jennifer thought, if she could complete the ritual, she could destroy the book, or at least free her soul. She gathered the described ingredient: black candles, or salt, and an ancient amulet she found among Blackwood's belongings, and began to prepare the ritual in the heart of the ruined mansion. As she recited the banishment words, the shadows around her seemed to stir, as if sensing the impending threat. The house trembled, the walls groaning and cracking, as if the very structure was trying to expel her. But Jennifer continued, her voice firm, despite the fear burning inside her. Suddenly, an invisible force threw her against the wall, interrupting the ritual. Jennifer struggled to get up, feeling the blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. The shadows around her condensed, taking grotesque forms that crawled towards her. In the midst of this chaos, Elias Blackwood's figure reappeared, his eyes burning with supernatural fury. "You cannot escape," he shouted, his voice echoing with a power that shook the mansion's foundation. "The book demands its tribute, and you are the chosen one." Desperate, Jennifer did the only thing she could think of. With a defiant scream, she clutched the amulet to her chest, reciting the final words of the ritual with all the strength she had left. The light around her exploded in a blinding flash, and the shadows recoiled, screaming in agony. For a moment, everything was silent. Jennifer fell to her knees, her body exhausted, feeling a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had succeeded. But then, a cold and cruel laugh echoed through the mansion's walls. Blackwood stood, untouched, triumphant expression on his face. "You really thought you could defeat the book?" He approached slowly, his figure imposing and terrifying. "Your fate is sealed, Jennifer. You belong to the book now. And never believe in words written in an old book. The banishment ritual is not for me or the evil energies belonging to the book, but it is for the banishment of your soul. You could enjoy it, or get completely lost, and chose the latter." Jennifer for an instant couldn't believe what she was hearing. With a blink of an eye, she saw the house in its most beautiful time, beautiful, luxurious, Blackwood well-dressed and enjoying a spark of eternal life. At the same moment, she saw disturbing souls, blood, death, and pain. That would be her destiny, completely lost in her own choices. Before she could react, Blackwood extended his hand and touched her forehead. The pain was immediate and unbearable, as if 1,000 needles were burning her skin. Jennifer screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the surrounding shadows. She felt her body disintegrate, her soul being ripped out and sucked into the book. The last thing she saw was the book's cover closing over her, the pages consuming her completely. The mansion returned to silence, the air heavy with the smell of extinguished candles and the remnants of a lost battle. Now, deep within the library, the book rests, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim. The stories within it are richer, more vivid, for they now contain Jennifer's essence, forever trapped in the pages of an endless nightmare. And the cycle continues, an eternal invitation to the abyss, awaiting its next reader. And so, Jennifer's story joins the countless souls trapped in the dark pages of a cursed book. Do you also feel the shiver down your spine and the thrill of uncovering the most macabre mysteries? You're in the right place. Here, we explore the darkest corners of the imagination, where each story is a portal to the unknown. Subscribe to our channel and follow our terrifying narratives, filled with suspense and twists that will make your heart race. Don't miss our next stories, where terror comes to life and fear becomes reality. Join us and discover what lurks in the shadows. Are you ready to face your worst nightmares? Then click the subscription button and turn on notifications. The darkness is waiting for you. And don't believe in things written in old books. They can be cunning traps to capture your soul.